Hey everyone, Decius here with another video. And in this video, I want to do a book review on George R. R. Martin's 2018 Fire and Blood. Doesn't really show up that good on the webcam because of the blur effect, but that's what I'm going to be talking about. And this is going to be kind of an off-the-cuff review. I'm just going to be speaking my mind. I don't really even have an outline, but I just want to talk about some of the general thoughts I have and my overall consensus of the story, as well as the historical fiction genre as well, since this is my first introductory book into getting into historical fiction. So it was definitely a very interesting experience to kind of get into reading in that kind of third-person referential setting that's kind of going through the years really quickly, and there's a lot of different accounts and perspectives of where the information might be coming from, because the book itself is comprised by a maester very far down the line, probably into past Robert's Rebellion, just kind of reflecting on the whole Targaryen dynasty. And he kind of uses three main perspectives as he's writing this book, three accounts from that time. One of them is a jester guy. His name's Mushroom. He's like a dwarf that he was one of the main jesters in the Targaryen family for King Viserys and onward. So past the reign of King Jaehaerys, Mushroom shows up with King Viserys and into the Dance with Dragons, which is this whole civil war with the Targaryens. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you probably already know the gist of the story, or you're at least familiarized with the TV show House of the Dragon, because there's definitely going to be a lot of spoilers in this video. So if you're still looking to read Fire and Blood or even watch House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, first off, I don't know why you're watching this video. Second off, turn the video off, read the book, listen to the audiobook, watch House of the Dragon. It's some good stuff, and it's not worth it to get spoiled before seeing all that fun stuff. It wouldn't be fun to be spoiled through some book review on YouTube. So let's get started. So there's Mushroom, there is, I think his name's Maester Orwyle, and then there's a Septim Barth or something like that. I'm not good with these exact names because there's a lot of them and I didn't write an outline for this review. So those are the three main accounts that I'm aware of that go through from even before Aegon the Conqueror. The book really starts off very far before Aegon's conquering of Westeros, of the Seven Kingdoms, which I really found interesting, and I kind of wish it delved even further into it. The Targaryens that fled Valyria 12 years before the Doom of Valyria, went to Dragonstone. They were basically living on Dragonstone for like 100 years before Aegon actually conquered Westeros, which was kind of new information for me. I always pictured Aegon the Conqueror, like they fled Valyria, maybe they stayed in Dragonstone for a couple years to plan it out and then conquered, but there was like 2 generations of Targaryens that lived on Dragonstone and kind of settled there in the offshores of eastern Westeros well before they actually took over. And I just found that really interesting, and as well to think of just the different kingdoms that kind of coexisted with the Targaryens. Like, did these other kingdoms, especially near the Stormlands and just on the eastern side of Westeros, was there some feuds between the Targaryens? Was there a big impact that they might have had? Because there were dragons the whole time just chilling on Dragonstone. And there was also some accounts that Aegon the Conqueror, before conquering, he would visit with his sisters to Old Town and the Citadel. He would travel to Westeros, probably on Dragonback. Maybe not. I think he wanted to stay concealed or something before that, but I just found that really interesting, just the whole dynamic of that, because that's a long time in the grand scheme of Westeros, and everything that happens in 100 years, that is a long time for like nothing crazy to happen. And the Velaryons are also a Valyrian family that is living like near Driftmark. So there was kind of 2 Valyrians families, houses coexisting in the eastern parts of Westeros for a long time before Aegon decided to conquer. So that realm ran to side. It goes through Aegon conquering. I don't want to, now that I think about it with this video, I don't want to go too far into just recounting the plot because I don't really think that actually showcases much of my thoughts on it. But I really liked that it talked about before Aegon the Conqueror for a bit. And going into it, I already knew a lot of the Targaryen lore just from watching videos on YouTube talking about a lot of the generalizations of the story and how Aegon did conquer Westeros, and, you know, Maegor the Cruel and King Jaehaerys, Queen Alysanne. I kind of had a gist of some of the major things that happened in the storyline up to that point. But I tried to really stay ignorant with the House of the Dragon storyline. I purposely never wanted to watch any videos going over the Dance with Dragons because I just didn't really want to be spoiled, and especially from a YouTube video. Just for me, and I'm sure most people, like, I want to just read the pages and get that information from the book first, and then hear it on YouTube as discussions and stuff. Because it definitely takes away the fun if I already kind of know everything that happens. And I did know quite a bit of what happens from just watching YouTube 12-hour videos of the Targaryen dynasty up through, you know, past King Jaehaerys, Queen Alysanne. Like, there's a lot that happens just in that reign because he was king for literally 55 years. And yeah, I'm getting off topic again, but there is just so much in this book, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. There were some stretches that were kind of dull, and I think that was part of the genre as well, since it is historical fiction. You're not in the heads of these characters very much. There isn't a lot of emotion that I really felt reading this book. It was mostly just kind of a fascination, kind of a sense of curiosity when reading it. I think the most I felt emotionally when I read this book was near the end of A Dance with Dragons, or I think that's the name of the 5th book, A Dance with Dragons. A Dance of the Dragons? I can't even think of it. Mostly it's called The Death of the Dragons. That's what it's... Realistically, that's what it really is. All of the dragons were slowly getting killed off, and when it got to the point where there's the shepherd in King's Landing, and he is becoming somewhat of a cult leader in the absence of any official ruler in King's Landing for that bit there, like with Queen Rhaenyra kind of hiding in the Red Keep and just trying to escape, and like just shit is hitting the fan in King's Landing, and all of the small folk are like thousands and thousands are banding together, full of rage, and they're all rioting to the dragon pits, to where all of the dragons are held. And it was really, like, that's where I felt the most emotion, because it was just super depressing and dark, because they all got in there and they're all just massacring the dragons. They're just poking them with sticks and spears and pitchforks and torches, even though that wouldn't realistically do that much. And the dragons were all shackled, so they couldn't fly away. They defended themselves the best they could. They burned hundreds, thousands of people on fire and, you know, defending themselves because they're fucking dragons. But the people, and I didn't expect that, the people actually killed all those dragons inside. I think there's 3 of them. And one of the last dragons that died was Dreamfire in there. And Dreamfire was the biggest one, and she was trying to fly away kind of a little bit, and she got poked in the eye, and just like that was dark. When I was reading that, I'm like, oh my god, that is terrible. And yeah, that was my favorite part about the book. I mean, was the dragons. Just kind of learning about the dragons, just picturing them flying around Westeros. It's cool that we see that in House of the Dragon, and obviously in Game of Thrones as well, with Daenerys and the 3 dragons there. But it's cool to picture the Targaryens in their height of power with so many dragons, and the interactions with all of these different areas of Westeros, like with Casterly Rock, with Winterfell, with the Wall. Just how big of an impact having dragons would have in this world logistically and just as a military force. If you have these creatures at your disposal, at your will, at your power, you immediately have an OP advantage that is really, you can't really compete with it. And it really goes to show that the Targaryens, they had this power because of the dragons. If they didn't have the dragons, they didn't have the numbers, they would never have ruled Westeros. And it kind of goes to show that they didn't really have to try at a certain extent, because they were revered by the people as gods, having these dragons to control. And it kind of just goes to show the extent of power on a tangible level, and also a level of just through your perception. Because half of the Targaryen dynasty, they didn't have dragons. The dragons died off 130 years into the Targaryen dynasty, and they still ruled for another 150 years past that point. And past that point, they didn't have these super powerful military weapons to be able to fly anywhere at a moment's notice, or turn the tide for any battle that they ever wanted to turn the tide for. They didn't have that power, but they had the history backing up that power, and the status that gives, and also the resources and the loyalty that they amassed up to that point that still just carries on. It's like the dragons had such a gravity that even in their absence, that gravity is still pressing down on the perception of the people living in Westeros and the Targaryens themselves. And I just find that part so interesting, and how that is a parallel to reality as well, of how we view conventional power with resources and status by certain things and objects and external roles and all of these things. It really does have a very relevant aspect of just humanity in general, how we view ourselves in accordance to others, and how people can take advantage of that to manipulate others and want power, want control. And it was just very interesting, and I'm really excited to rewatch House of the Dragon again, and even Game of Thrones, and even rereading A Song of Ice and Fire again, with all of the added context and the backings of history. Because I was just reading Game of Thrones again, and I'm still only about 100 pages into the first book. I was reading a Tyrion chapter, and he goes on this huge inner monologue about the immensity of the dragons and how he's always been fascinated by them and the Targaryens, and being down in the crypts of King's Landing and seeing Baleriond's head, and how the bones are onyx, like just onyx reflections and fireproof, and just how interesting that is. And then he's kind of mentioning it to Jon Snow in passing, and Jon Snow, it's like, who cares? The dragons are gone, you know? And that is where we're at when we are experiencing the bulk of A Song of Ice and Fire. We are immersed within the world without dragons, and with dragons looked at as a far bygone era in the past, and even the Targaryens at that point as part of history. And being able to read so much dense history about the Targaryen dynasty in Westeros, and how all the kingdoms adapted, and how the Seven Kingdoms didn't really become Seven Kingdoms after the Conquering. They were kind of unified. They all had to bow to Aegon the Conqueror, else they'd all get set on fire, like Harren with Harrenhal. And it was just fascinating to read. And I think one of the most uninteresting parts of the book, for me at least, was near the end. I did find Aegon III's kind of childhood and regencies pretty depressing, because he is just a traumatized young kid who is now forced to be king after most of his family murdered each other, and a dragon ate his mom. He hates dragons. Like, has definitely, like, I'm not trying to throw diagnoses out here, but he definitely has some PTSD and just anxiety, depression. Like, he doesn't talk to people. He has a lot of antisocial behavior. He's probably full of rage and sadness, and that part was pretty depressing to read. And he's literally called Aegon, like, the unworthy, or not unworthy, like Aegon the unhappy. Like, that's his main name, and it's like Aegon the unlucky. All of the dragons died off during his reign, and it didn't really the book didn't go over his whole reign because that was past the death of the dragons at that point. But it did go through his early life and kind of these regents that were taking advantage of him and power, and were just kind of assholes to him, to this kid who was grieving the death of his parents and his siblings, and just the tragedy of watching his family fall apart in front of him and being a powerless kid, and then all of a sudden being thrust into this role of supreme power without even being able to have any power because he's still a kid. So people still taking advantage of him. But there was a lot in between that. There was a lot of stuff about Lys and like pirates and I don't know, just stuff happening outside of King's Landing that I didn't really find that much of an interest in. That's just my opinion there. I do find a lot of the stuff in Essos interesting, but I think some of those things, for me at least, they seemed kind of irrelevant for my own interest for what I was kind of looking for out of the book. That was the only low point that I can really recount in reading this book, is like right near the tail end. Like, it was already really dark, and the whole death of the dragon sequence in the book, which really takes like 30 to 40% of the book, I zoomed through that because it was just so interesting. And I'm really looking forward to season 3 of House of the Dragon coming out next year, and I'm really excited for Dunk and Egg as well. I just read that book 2 months ago or something like that. Maybe I'll make a video talking about that as well. But oh my god, it was such a good book, and it's just so interesting to find this family, this dynasty, this fantasy world so compelling, because I don't have even the interest to read like real history like as much as I have to read this kind of like fictional history, and I think that's kind of sad. But also, I know that so much of this fictional history comes from inspired by real life events and real life history, and it does give me some motivation to read real history. And I think that's kind of cool. It's a nice gateway, because I think fiction is a nice escape for a lot of us, including me. Like, reading fantasy, it's a really nice escape and being able to be in a different world, but there is still so much to find parallels in the real world, and all of the fictional worlds are based on aspects of humanity and reality, and you can never really escape that. But it kind of allows you to play within the parameters of different topics without risking your life, being in these circumstances. And that's my main takeaway from this book, is just it is my introduction into historical fiction, and it's also gave me some motivation, some inspiration to read real history. And maybe I'll read about the Roman Empire. But if you're still watching this video, thank you very much for watching. If you have any recommendations, if you're into real life history, and I would love to hear any kind of topics that you are very fascinated in, because I'm kind of looking for something to read that's more nonfiction and more historical, but I don't really know where to start. So if you love Game of Thrones, if you love Fire and Blood, and you also love history, I would love to hear your opinion because I feel like there's probably a lot of parallels between the kinds of history, even if it's all history that you're interested in, that if you're also interested in this stuff, that there's probably some sort of connection there. So I'd love to hear any insight in the comments. Where should I begin for reading history? If there's like a book about the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire, or, you know, just industrialization or even contemporary modern day stuff, I would love to learn more about it, because we learn more about ourselves through history and just have more of awareness for how the patterns of humanity through time. And I'm kind of getting off topic from Fire and Blood itself, but that's the beauty of rambling, and also the beauty of these kinds of stories, especially through George R. R. Martin. You can infinitely dive into the worlds and the meanings, the symbolism in so many different ways, and there are countless analyses on YouTube about any sort of aspect of A Song of Ice and Fire. And right now, that's kind of my favorite videos to watch right now. I'm back into the Westerosi sphere of things, and I think I'll probably want to make more videos about like Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe try out an analysis or a video essay to challenge myself to try to put my thoughts into a more concise manner with like slideshow or like showing pictures and like a narration. I feel like that would be kind of fun to make. But anyways, I don't want to take your time for too long. I really, really enjoyed this book, and there's not a lot of negatives I have to say about it besides it being kind of dull at certain points because of the fact that it's not like a cerebral, narrative, plot-driven experience. It's more of a recounting. I loved that there was conflicts between certain things that happened and what might have happened, and another possibility of what might have happened, and how, like, especially with Mushroom's reports, how they differ so much from like what the Septon or the Maester said. So I really did like that, and it kind of reflects the reality of history as well, of maybe we don't know the full stories of things. People are fallible, and there can be things that are lost in translation, and people want certain narratives to be the main narrative for people to view reality from, because it's easier to control people and to hold certain things in certain regards by controlling the narratives. And I think this book helped me see things more clearly through that perspective as well. And in House of the Dragon, we kind of saw the canon way that some of the events played out, and how the book had different alternatives for what happened, but there was also the alternative that did actually happen in the TV show. So I like that. And I know a lot of people are upset with like season 2 of House of the Dragon because there was some differing with the plot, like especially with like Nettles not being in the show, and just kind of the dynamic between Rhaenyra and Alicent, of how Rhaenyra is very favorably displayed in the show, and the Greens are more villainized, and there's just more of it's more of like a Hollywood-esque version, but I mean, that was kind of bound to happen in these kind of shows because that's what people want to see. And I think it's easy for people that love the books to hate on the show, and I completely understand that because, yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of season 2. Season 1 was awesome. It had so much depth. It felt like early Game of Thrones. Season 2 felt kind of like later on Game of Thrones, and I definitely saw that. Especially with the ending, it was so disappointing. I remember that, like, I was waiting for something to happen because they had the Battle of Rook's Rest in like episode 4, and near the end, it's like, all right, is something gonna happen? Or like it just was setting up, and it felt like, okay, nothing was happening. So season 3 shit's gonna definitely go down. There were some horrific battle scenes in Fire and Blood, like the battle on the Narrow Sea with just Jacaerys, like Rhaenyra's oldest son. He died with his dragon, like getting drowned in the ocean, and Aegon the Third, like, and Viserys, like, Aegon the Third escaped barely, and his dragon died, and he never forgave himself for thinking that Viserys died, and then he eventually showed up again, which was kind of nice to see. Kind of gave Aegon the Third a little bit less survivor's guilt, which was probably good for his mental health a bit there. But man, the battle with Daemon and Aemond, with Vhagar and Caraxes, that is going to be crazy. Because, like, Daemon literally jumped off Caraxes and stabbed Aemon in the eye. And I think it was his eye that was, like, his last eye. Like, he stabbed Dark Sister right through his head. And Vhagar, they just collapsed into the God's Eye. And it was, I love the part where it's like, and they didn't find Vhagar's body or Aemon's until 6 years later, like well past the death of the dragons. And Dark Sister's blade was still through his skull, like on the dragon. Like, that shit was gas. That was awesome. And just kind of twisted, but like it adds like that nice, because you already have glimpses of the future well past the book here, but since it's historical fiction, you can still see glimpses of the future, and that was really cool to see. So I'm going to end it on that note with like some of my favorite parts of the book there. There's so much I could talk about with King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, and, you know, Maegor the Cruel, Aenys, like those earlier kings. I love that part. Like, I love Jaehaerys and Alysanne. It was so cool to see their inception of their rule to the end and just all their kids, but like it was a lot of tragedy, a lot of death. But it was so cool to see how they developed all of these things like the King's Road and just better tax plans just for like spices rather than major things where people would get more upset, like taxing more luxury items where people who had the money would pay it regardless. I could go on and on. This video will be hours long, and I don't want to do that to you guys. 30 minutes is a good enough time to ramble. If you're still watching this video, I really appreciate you watching. We are nearing 2,000 subscribers, so if you enjoy book reviews, if you enjoy A Song of Ice and Fire, if you enjoy gaming, I make videos about those kind of things. I want to make more Game of Thrones videos in the future, so I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel and also left a like on the video as well. That always helps with the YouTube AI monstrosity algorithm, get these things out, get it out on the matrix for other eyes to ingest. But without further ado, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Peace.